The state of Michigan's Foundation Allowance program will be discussed. As realized, this state foundation funding model is one of the most popular means to distribute funds to PK through 12 schools. The foundation program, a distribution method designed in the 1920s and based on a district's ability to raise local property tax. This foundation program intends to ensure uniform state monies for all public schools districts. Prior to Proposition A, the state of Michigan employed a modified power equalization method. Now the state uses a foundation model. After Proposal A, student funding was tied to each pupil counted in a district's student membership. Districts receive a foundation allowance, which is a per pupil amount initially established by the fiscal year 95 amount. As a foundation program, the basic formula takes a student's membership and multiplies it by the target amount set by the legislature, which is $9,608 for fiscal year 2014. With this figure, the local contribution is subtracted from the amount. Under Proposal A, school districts are expected to levy 18 mills on non-homestead property. For the purposes of determining the state's portion of the foundation allowance, it is assumed that districts levy the full 18 mills. After this non-homestead property deletion, the amount of state basic aid or equalization aid is fixed. For example, if a district with a foundation allowance of 8,000 has 1,000 pupils, it would receive $8 million in foundation allowance revenue. However, the state pays only a portion of this revenue. The amount remaining after subtracting the amount of local revenue that the district is expected to collect from a non-homestead property taxes remains a district's foundation allowance. With foundation funding, the state legislature specifies a per student target funding level and sets a minimum property tax rate applied to a district's property valuation to ascertain fiscal capacity. In Michigan, the local revenue from 18 mills is calculated on a per pupil basis for the state's purposes. The state deducts the per pupil local revenue from the lesser of the foundation allowance or establishes a hold harmless guaranteed per pupil amount. Districts above the hold harmless cap may levy additional mills with voter approval to achieve their prescribed foundation allowance. In our example, there are three school districts. Munising is a relatively property poor district because its non-homestead total property valuation is a little over $45 million. Central Lake is a medium wealthy district because its non-homestead local property valuation is almost $63 million. New Buffalo is a wealthy district with $203 million in non-homestead total property valuation. Notice the three different per pupil amounts for 18 mills. Munising is the lowest and New Buffalo is the highest. The 18 mill collection affects the state's funding responsibility as Munising receives the most state aid with $3,408 per pupil. Central Lake takes $2,246 per pupil, and New Buffalo would receive only $867 per pupil. However, New Buffalo is a hold harmless district and will receive $2,527 per pupil as they levy 12 mills. This example underscores the impact of the 18 mills on a district's state allowance. As in many states, the legislature, their funding formula is a compilation of laws passed over the years, and the formula evolves with mounting levels of complexity. With serial attempts to improve the funding outcome, legislators on occasion attempt to dispatch lawsuits, categorize special needs for students and districts, and address accessible financial resources. As such, each legislative budgetary session may generate amendments to modify the existing formula, as was the case in Michigan in 1994. The state of Michigan foundation formula is quite complex and convoluted, as most states. On this mock financial payment report, the target foundation amount is $7,750. You will also see the non-homestead property valuation and community property valuation, mills, and individual revenue. These figures combined equal the assumed total local revenue. Line E is the local revenue per student membership, and it is assumed that the local revenue divided by the student membership. That's how it's determined. In the column to your right, you will see the student membership variables, general education students, and sections 52 and 53 of special education students. Please note that Michigan does not pay for preschool students' education. Line 22A begins the formula by establishing the state's per pupil obligation from fiscal year 95 minus local revenue per membership. Calculations now input special education formula data. Here is the formula for proposal A obligation amount. Here you see the special education formula and allocation, including special education hold harmless variable. Here is the formula for special education reimbursement costs and transportation costs. Here is the formula for special education hold harmless. Here is the formula for special education Headley obligation amount. Here is the formula for discretionary payment. As you see, the Michigan Foundation formula for funding PK through 12 schools is quite complex. You are not expected to know this formula, but you should recognize the basics of the formula, particularly the membership, the amount that is deducted, the non-homestead property value. Fortunately for school districts and state departments of education employees, the funding for each school district is determined by a computer program that has these variables plugged into it. This concludes the presentation.